Welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about creating the mug. The mug is the adaptation on the cylinder. So the main skills in this video that I'll be demonstrating is adapting the cylinder somehow, undercutting so that you have a nice lifted feel to it. And then in another video, we'll talk more in depth about the handle and how to pull a handle and attach the handle. You should have already watched the kind of discussion piece that I made about handles and cylinders, and that should get you ready for this lesson. Now, things that you'll need is you'll need a wooden rib, a rubber rib, or a metal rib to kind of adapt your cylinder. You'll need your pin tool. I'll show you about making the lip of the cylinder for the mug. And if you want to have another textured rib for making texture, that's fine. And then, of course, you'll need your undercut tool. Those are all tools that are essential, as well as, of course, your wire, your water, and the beloaded sponge. All right. So, getting started, you'll center your clay. This should be old hat at this point. Making sure that you've got your clay patted down. Seal it to the wheel head. Start your coning. Cone once. Compress. Cone again. Compress. Make sure that as you're centering, you're keeping in mind that you are still wedging the clay. You should, of course, have your clay wedged before you started. Super important. And make sure that each time you seal it back down to the wheel head so that you don't get any wiggles or ripples at the bottom. Okay. And my last cone. And I actually have a little air bubble in there. I was just able to force out the top. So if you have an air bubble, sometimes it's better to just take your clay right off and wedge it up again, especially as a beginning potter. You can kind of deal with it a little better as you get more experience. But it's good to just get rid of those air bubbles as soon as you can, because they'll creep up on you as you're throwing. And I might reap what I sow here and have trouble with that air bubble as well. Okay, now, I'm going to slow it down. Here's my centered clay. Going to do my wheel maintenance and just tidy up so you can see things better. Now, as far as our cylinder goes, we're just going to pull up a cylinder, just like we've learned with making our cylinder. And you can notice I've made this a little bit narrower because I know I'm pulling a cylinder rather than a bowl. And I'm going to have trouble because I do have that air bubble in there, but we'll get it out. Okay, so here we go. This will be a great example of dealing with a wiggly rim. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. Notice how I'm using my thumb to brace my index finger as I open the form. Now I'm down to about a 1/4 inch on the inside. Okay, I'm going to compress the rim before I pull. out. I'm going to pull it out. Nice and slow. Okay, and you might be able to see in the video it's starting to wiggle just a bit because I've got that bubble in there throwing things off center. But here we go, I'm going to compress the rim. Now, just like in our cylinder, I'm going to compress the inside. And as I'm compressing that inside, I'm kind of, remember, we've just stretched all the platelets out. Now I want to push them back together a little bit to kind of prevent from getting S cracks at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to pull back in from the edge to the center. All right. Now, just for fun, dry out the center. Now I'm going to start working on the edges, making my cylinder. Compress the rim. Now I'm going to pull with the sponge. Some people, like I've demonstrated before, pulling with their fingers, pulling with a knuckle, or using the sponge. So I'm going to just pull with the sponge so I can demonstrate that. Basically the same thing as working with your fingers, but you just have a little different feel because you're using that sponge, and it has a different moisture level, obviously, than your skin. I tend to prefer throwing with the sponge because I feel like I can regulate that moisture level better. Now, I'm just going to use my thumb and undercut this a bit to help the centering. Now, one thing you might be able to see in the video, you can see how the top of my pot is kind of wiggly there. All right. Sometimes, no matter how good the potter is, you can get wiggly tops because, like I said, I've got that air bubble in there. So this is where the pin tool comes in. Demonstrating this is essential. Sometimes you'll get a little wiggly top, and what you can do is take your pin tool and hold your finger on the inside of your pot, drag the pin tool along the edge there until it presses into your finger, and then you can lift that little bit off, and this bit would go back into your water, and that can kind of tidy up that rim sometimes if your rim gets a little bit too out of whack. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 more pulls for my cylinder. Compress the rim. One more pull. Put a little water on the inside. If you squeeze the sponge right here on your knuckle and hold your finger there, the water will run down your finger and kind of lubricate the inside of the pot there. Now, I'm going to stop mid-pull here. You can kind of see I've got my finger ridge here. I'm actually going to, I would like to do another just straight pull, but I'm going to start to adapt my cylinder. We've got our cylinder already pulled, and at this point, I'm going to leave like a middle ridge right there where I'm going to just leave a little bit of clay until I pull down a little, and then I'm going to start, I kind of just left a lump there. I'm going to start right here and pull that piece in. Now you see I've kind of already started to adapt my cylinder just with my fingers, but I want to go back and talk about the wooden rib. So here's our wooden rib where you can start to adapt to the cylinder, whether with a curve this way, a curve that way, maybe an angle by holding your rib on an angle. And so as you adapt your cylinder, start thinking about how you're going to do that. First of all, I'm going to undercut just a bit here to start my shaping, and take any of this leftover clay, pop it into your water bucket. Now I'm going to shape by holding my rib in this way, okay? And you can kind of see the form here up here. I'm actually going to pull down to compress it a little bit. Now I'm going to pull back up. And get kind of that curved in goblet-like shape at the bottom. Now I've got this rib I left here. I'm just going to flatten it out just a bit. And then I'm going to turn it in. Like that. So I've got kind of like a wider mug shape at the bottom. All right, now I'm just going to dry this clay out and talk about the rim. And do one more undercut. All right, so one more undercut here at the end. I'm just going to push this tool, kind of holding it on a 45-degree angle and pushing it in towards the clay like this. We want to get a nice cut underneath it. I'm just going to take my finger, and I could just trim that off with the undercut tool. I'm going to just kind of whip my finger underneath there and kind of smush it up. Kind of like that one taller pot that I showed you, where that clay was just kind of like smushed back up to kind of give it another form right there. And then the rim. Some artists use a little chemise. It's like a little leather piece like this to do their rims because it makes it nice and smooth. You can use one of those if I have them in the room at the moment, or you can just use your fingers. What you do is just like you're compressing the rim on any of the cylinder pieces. Take your finger and hold it fairly level to compress that rim first. Then what I like to do is I take my finger and I angle my finger down a little bit as I'm pinching, just to give it a kind of downward angle. Then I hold my other index finger underneath, so I'm kind of like angling down this way and pulling in this way to kind of give it just a little bit of a lip, a little bit of an undercut, and a little bit of a diagonal. Okay, now you can do that with your finger and get a nice smooth rim for later. Now this is pretty done. I've kind of altered that form of having this curve here, a curve there. Again, there's an infinite number of possibilities of what you could do to make your adaptation of a cylinder. And it should follow maybe a design that you've already made in class by drawing and kind of showing me just on the fly as you're getting started, or you can kind of try to experiment too. For cutting your piece off, a little water on one side, pull that water through, dry the hands, lift it off, and I'm going to place it over here on my board so you can see it. And here's that finished piece. If I hold it a little bit higher, you can kind of see that undercut. You can see the lip on the inside, and you can see how those little finger divots there, as soon as this dries out a bit, I'll divot the inside of that. All right, and that is how to go about starting the adaptation of your cylinder for your mug lesson. We'll come back in another lesson and talk about pulling the handle and attaching the handle.